Thank you for that great introduction, Garrett. And thank you all for being here today. It's great to be here in person, and I'm excited to share some details on product thinking approaches for creative ops. So as Garrett mentioned, my name is Dylan Flesch. I'm the digital asset manager at New York Public Radio here in New York. Move forward in my slides here. And today I'm going to be talking about product thinking. So I'll start with some definitions. What is product thinking? What are products? And then I'll talk about four different values that I've found really useful in my approach to digital asset management and taxonomy management. So values from sort of the product thinking space and how I've brought those into the areas of DAM and creative ops. So first, falling in love with your problem space, understanding your users will be next, and performing market research, and then iterative development. So just a little more background on me. I've been working in digital asset management for 12 years, as Garrett mentioned. My first role in this field was at a public radio station in Seattle called KEXP, and I was in charge of implementing a digital asset management system and moved them from a world where DJs were running into the library, grabbing CDs, running back to the DJ booth to get the right song on air. So by introducing this DAM and digitizing their CD collection, bringing everything from these silos forward into modern technology, DJs all of a sudden had an hour back in their day. So ever since then, that was over 10 years ago now, I've been finding new ways to kind of give creative teams time back in their day. So I have been doing that now at New York Public Radio since June of 2020. And by applying product thinking approaches to my work there, I've been able to solve lots of workflow and metadata issues at that organization. So moving forward here, I'm going to talk about products and product thinking. So I think a lot of people here are probably familiar with Agile. I know that's popular in a lot of different industries. And I think product thinking and product management kind of grew out of that field, but is becoming popular in lots of different industries. So I know, for instance, that in media and entertainment, where I'm working, a lot of organizations are adding product-oriented roles. Like Vox has 100+ people who are product staff. New York Times has somewhere between 50 and 100, and Washington Post is similar. And they're continuing to add these roles because they're finding that it's a really useful sort of bridge to have on and across your different teams. So to start with, what is a product? Products are many different things. I think most often it's used to refer to external products, so things that are maybe your website or your owned and operated platforms. But I think that it's also your internal tools and also your creative workflows. I know that some media organizations will pride themselves on their CMS, and that's actually a selling point to bring on staff that want a simple system that works well. And I think that a creative workflow can be similar to that. So investing your time in your creative process as if it were a product that was external facing, I think is really valuable. So it's a way, product thinking is a way of innovating to maximize the value of your efforts. So that's the number one thing above everything else, is understanding what your users are looking for, what's valuable to them, what are the problems they need solved, and then taking a full product lifecycle approach. So not looking at just a sliver of a workflow or a moment in time, but thinking about things from, kind of zero to eventual sunset. Third is strategizing and establishing alignment between teams. So I think I talked about product owners or product managers as kind of a bridge role between your content, your technology, and your business departments. And anyone can do this. It doesn't have to be someone who is, has the official title product owner. You can kind of fill that void if it's not something that's happening at your org currently. And finally, product thinking is delivering continuous improvements to users. So now I'm going to talk just a bit about creative product at New York Public Radio. So for those of you who might not know, New York Public Radio is home to WNYC and WNYC Studios, where we have podcasts like Radio Lab, Death, Sex, and Money, and the great Brian Lair is on the air every weekday. And across those brands, we publish tons of content. So we publish over 40 on-demand assets every day, close to 15,000 a year. And what all of those have in common is that they're going through a creative operations process, through many different creative operations processes. So those processes all have some amount of inefficiency in them. We can, easily find 10 minutes in each of those workflows that adds up quickly. So 10 minutes across 15,000 assets is 2,000 hours, which is equivalent to a full-time employee working for an entire year. So part of my job is kind of finding those inefficiencies and figuring out how to remove them. So the first kind of product thinking value I wanted to talk about today was falling in love with your problem space. So I think, something that's really important, but often I think people feel an aversion to, is really focusing on the issues that users are trying to solve. It feels maybe nicer to just look at, what you want to work towards, but really diving in to understand what are the problems is key. So one approach from the product thinking toolkit, if you will, that I've found useful here is using objectives and key results, or OKRs. So this is kind of a team workshop that I've run with different business units at New York Public Radio to get from each of those teams, whether it's a content team, we have our newsroom, studios, or music teams, or our archives department, who also manage tons of content. And working with those teams to sort of establish what are their high-level goals that they're working towards, and what are some of the key results that they would recognize as progress towards those goals. So for our archives department, one of the key problems was time spent on non-specialized tasks or non-creative or non-curatorial tasks was too high. So that was the problem space they were, living in day to day. And their objective was to solve their biggest workflow problems by automating recurring archival deposits. So these 15,000 assets every year were kind of building up and adding, day after day to their backlog. So what they wanted to do was automate those tasks that they had been performing manually. Our content teams had a slightly different problem space. They were that was kind of most important to them, or their biggest pain point, I guess. And for them, internal search experience was just awful. I think you've all maybe experienced, a CMS internal search and not been able to retrieve the assets that you created 5 years ago, a year ago, or even last week. So that was kind of the problem space we were working in with these teams. And then they wanted to, in addition to that, content was spread across all these different information systems, and didn't have any sort of standardized metadata across those systems. So the results they wanted was delivering a better search experience that allowed them to better reuse assets, and then they wanted systems that had shared language, just using the same term for the same field or same concept across different systems. So over the last year and a half or so, the Archives Department's key objective has been delivered. So this was how things were before, 1,000 items a month adding into their backlog queue. This was work that they would then be doing manually at the end of each year. And at this point, we've actually automated all of that work. So we're pulling our high-resolution audio files. For us, audio is one of our key content types, in addition to video and text, but audio most. Audio is kind of the biggest collection at our org. So we're pulling our high-quality audio files from our broadcast playout system, syncing those automatically with metadata from our CMS, and all of that gets deposited upon publishing without any human intervention in our DAM. So we're saving hundreds of hours a year for that team. Content teams, before our work over the last almost 2 years now, had these problems of lacking standards across systems, content that you had to go from system A to system B to find, and generally hard to find assets. So since then, we've been able to establish minimum viable metadata requirements for each type of content, and pull together 300,000 assets into our DAMs. We've also further enhanced those collections, particularly our audio collections, with full-text transcripts. So if a content team member is looking for podcast or broadcast from any time in the last 50 to almost 100 years, we've got content going way back to 1924 even. Our key audio assets now have full-text transcripts. So they can just type in even a phrase that was said during that radio program or that podcast and retrieve the asset with that. So the next sort of value in product thinking that I wanted to talk about was understanding your users. And one approach that I've found super useful in that area is user stories. So I haven't touched a lot on our taxonomy up to this point, but I'll be sharing a little bit more detail on it here. So user stories are, the point of them is really to get you talking to your end users and understanding what it is that they're working on, what are their day-to-day workflows, what's most valuable to them. So as you're writing these stories, you want to avoid writing the solution. You always want to be focusing on, what's actually happening before you start jumping to how to fix it. As you write these, you want to make sure you're writing testable requirements so that when you do actually develop and implement, you can look back and say, oh, okay, this actually solved the problem or not. And a common format of writing those is as a blank, I want to blank, so that, and here's an example of how that looks filled out. So as a reporter, I want to be able to quickly browse our topic taxonomy so I can quickly get a sense of coverage areas. So we have an organization-wide taxonomy that covers all types of concepts, people, organizations, content types, places, genres, etc. And topics is just actually one concept within that. But it has kind of risen in priority for a lot of our content teams to standardize that area. We currently have these legacy systems that are being eventually replaced, but they all have, each CMS has 100,000 uncontrolled topic tags. And there's no kind of overlap between them or relationship between those two areas. So that's become a focus area for us for sort of next problems to solve in our taxonomy. And so as we're approaching this, we've determined that it's not necessary for us to manage this on our own. There are products out there that already exist in defining topics. And so, we've been performing market research in that area to see how other orgs are handling topics and what products are available for us to purchase in this area or use for free, if those exist as well. So kind of identifying how these different products are differentiated was a problem we wanted to solve, and this is just an example of how we've analyzed one potential topic taxonomy to adopt at New York Public Radio. So we've created what I've been calling our data nutrition labels, which is kind of an idea out of, I think, the machine learning field. They've taken data sheets for data sets, and they're kind of analyzing these big data sets used for large language models or that type of thing, and kind of summarizing them in a quick, easy way to read. So we created these for our top 3 topic taxonomy vendors, so including Associated Press, that's the one you're seeing on the screen here, but also IPTC, and a couple from the library field as well. Next up, I wanted to talk about iterative development and minimum viable product. So it was key for us in launching our organization-wide taxonomy to start sort of where we were. We eventually wanted to have a centralized taxonomy management system, but didn't have the budget for it. So we delivered increments of value to our team by working with software we already had. We simply put that taxonomy into a Google Sheet and had field names, field descriptions, and added mappings of each of those concepts to our core production and publishing platforms. So wanting to just deliver that quick subset of functionality as quickly as possible. So how we did that with our taxonomy was, as I mentioned, starting with a spreadsheet and then moving to a centralized taxonomy management system later once we were able to prioritize that work. And most importantly, adding it to our content information systems like our DAM. So just to recap here, some of the product approaches that we've covered. Well, first we defined product and product thinking. We talked about the importance of falling in love with your product space, and one specific approach towards that of establishing OKRs. And we talked about writing user stories, the importance of understanding your users. We talked about market research and how that's useful in evaluating existing products, and then talked about developing iteratively and delivering small increments of value to your users. So that basically wraps it up for me. This is something we like to say at New York Public Radio, is that your DAM is not a final resting place for your assets, it's an investment in their future. So, thank you all.